So everybody, good evening. Thank you, Ray, for coming out this evening for a very important observance. Before we get started, I want to thank a number of people. Namely, I want to thank the Highland family for having being here tonight with us, and also for furthering this mission of memory and the idea of constantly trying to fix our world. I also want to thank our cantor who spearheaded this project and who has planned this evening and has done a beautiful job of creating this ceremony. So, cantor, thank you very much for all you've done for this wonderful night. The Holocaust is a very difficult subject to discuss because the wounds that we feel are not wounds that have closed. They are wounds that seem to open time and time again and have salt poured on them over and over again. When somebody says that the Holocaust did not happen, they are pouring salt on wounds that bleed still today. When somebody claims that the Holocaust is meaningless, they are pouring salt on those wounds. Just this past week, just this past Shabbos, as we were closing out the beautiful holiday of Pesach, as we were remembering the Exodus from Egypt, as Jews around the world were beginning to think about life on the other end of Pesach, an anti-Semite entered a sanctuary and murdered an innocent person for no other reason besides the fact that she was a Jew. Had it not been for a miracle that his gun jammed, we would not be talking about one person, we'd be talking about many people. It's hard to believe that we are living in 2019, the United States, and not 1941 in Germany. It's hard to believe that still in this very day we confront the same bigotry, the same hatred, the same everything. When our loved ones coined the phrase never again, they meant never again. And still we are being attacked, and still we must learn those words time and again. Yom Hashoah, declared by the Knesset in Israel as the day of international remembrance of the Holocaust, is the day of the Holocaust, Gvura, and the strength that we take from knowing that we survived, from knowing that we endured, and from knowing that we rise again and we build a new life. Just as the pilots did when they moved here to the United States, they built a new life with children and grandchildren, with a life of love, a life of caring, and a life of Yiddishkeit. And that is the response to Hitler's tyranny. That is the response to tyranny of today. As we say, forget what you have to say. We will build our world. We will build a beautiful world in spite of your anger and your hatred.
That we might remember and not lose hope.
We must face evil, and so doing reaffirm our faith in the future good.
We cannot erase yesterday's pains, but we can vow that we will not have them suffered in vain.
And so we pray. For those who are given death, let us choose life. For us and generations yet to come.
For those who have found courage to stand against evil, often at the cost of their lives, let us vow to carry on their struggle.
We must teach ourselves and our children to learn from hate that we must love, to learn from evil to live for good.
Please join me in reading. We remember them, the 6 million and the 5 million, in the rising of the sun and its going down, we remember them. In the blowing of the wind and in the chill of winter, we remember them. In the opening buds and in the rebirth of spring, we remember them. In the blueness of the sky and in the warmth of summer, we remember them. In the rustling of the leaves, and so long as we live, they too shall live, for they are now a part of us. We remember them.
6 candles are going to be lit now in memory of those who perished in the Holocaust.
We light the first candle to honor those who managed to survive the darkest hours of our history.
We light the second candle in memory of all the innocent victims, whether Jews or Gentiles, who perished in the hands of the Nazis in the days of the Holocaust.
We light the third candle to ensure the never-ending memory of those innocent victims killed in the Shoah.
We light the fourth candle to honor the righteous Gentiles who risked their lives at times to save the Jews of Europe.
We light the fifth candle to honor the 1.5 million children murdered by the Nazi tyranny.
Brought to the world in art, science, medicine, and every walk of life, all lost.
Our spirit is God's light.
Dachau,
שמי
Warsaw,
ועלמד יברח חילותי,
Boganovoka,
וימליך מלכותי,
Ravensbrück,
וחייכון וביומכון,
Vilna,
ולחיי לכל בית ישראל,
Treblinka,
בעגלה ובזמן קהיר,
Helmna,
ואמרו אמן.
יהי שמי רעה מבורך לעולם וממנו מלכה,
יתברך וישתבח,
Belzec,
ויתפאר ויתרומם,
Buchenwald,
ויתנשא ויתהדר,
Sobibor,
ויתעלה ויתעלל,
Maitonic,
שמי דקודשה בריחו,
Malkasen,
לעילה
Lodz,
מכל מלכתה ושירתה,
Gurs,
תושבחתה ונחמתה,
Babiyar,
דמיין ועלמה,
Bergen, Wilson,
ואמרו
Amen.
יהא שלמה רבה מן שמיא, וחיים עלינו ועל כל ישראל, ואמרו אמן. עושה שלום לברמה, הוא יעשה שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל, ואמרו אמן.
We rise for Amalek.
מלא רחמים, שופן במרומי, עצם מנוחה נכונה, על כנפי השכינה, ומעלות קדושים וטהורים, כזוהר הרקיע מזהירים, את נשמות כל אחינו בני ישראל, אנשים נשים וטף, שנהרגו ושנטבחו ושנשרפו ושנחנקו, וגדל תהי מנוחתם. הנבל הרחמים, אז תירם בסתר כנפיך לעולמים, וצרור ובצרור החיים את נשמותיהם. אדוני הוא נחלתם, וינוחו בשלום על משכבותיהם, ונאמר Amen.
Understands the atrocities of the Nazis during the Holocaust. She and her family have been members of Rodeph Sholom for 44 years. Born in 1932 in Munich, Germany, Rodeph was the youngest of 3 children to Charlotte and Moritz Neuberger. She was in Munich for the beginning of the Holocaust, experiencing Kristallnacht right around their apartment. As things worsened, she left Munich for a German farm. She will tell you her experiences and those of her husband, Solomon Saman tonight in hopes that we all never forget the Holocaust effect on more than just the 6 million who died. And this, I give you my mother, Rodeph.
It is hard now to talk because we didn't forget, and yet we are reading in the paper constantly the shooting and the mischief that is being taken on synagogues and everything else. So some of you knew my husband, and he was really a person that there's very few left of those. He took, and he very seldom would speak about what all had happened to him. Matter of fact, I knew he was what they called a KZler, which was the word for the remnants of the concentration camp. And he would not speak, he would not tell anybody anything what had happened to him. But because anytime he would talk to somebody, they, oh, you were in the war, you're this, you're that, and he would say yes, and he would start telling something, and they would say, you're making that up just to get Rahmanis. So he stopped, and he wasn't the only one who did that. Most of the ones who survived the concentration camps did not talk. When he first started talking was in 1990. Schindler's List came out, and somehow we were stuck in an airport, and we went to the bookstore, and he saw the picture on the book, and he said, this was a good man, because he said his life was really because the first 16 months of being in the big concentration camp in Hashoah, he got to work for him. And he said, if it wouldn't have been for Schindler, he said, I don't think I would have made it through the whole war. But then he started bit by bit different things that had happened to him. And we, the kids, we just listened, and it was hard, but he always had a smile on his face. There was what was his trademark. He would smile and he would tell you the most gruesomest things that had happened. He told that one time he was with his brother yet, and they were the only two that had survived so far in the camp. And he would pretty much stick with him, but then he was sick, and after he was sick, he would go and he would work. He was in Schindler's factory too. Schindler would produce pellets for the guns, and also pots and pans which were dunked into an emalia, and it would be sold then after it hardened. But he just was sick, and he fell asleep at that machine he was working. And as he was working, come Goethe, the main camp leader for Hashoah, and he right away pulled his pistol. But Schindler said, "In my factory, you're not shooting anybody." Yeah, he says, but you have to send them back to the main camp, which then he had to do. And my late husband would go and say to Schindler, I want to go with him because he's all I have left of the family, and I would like to go where he goes. So Schindler 3 times asked him, are you sure you want to leave here? And he said 3 times, yes, I want to go with my brother, because to my late husband, family was the whole bit. But then they were separated again when, I don't know, who saw the movie Schindler's List, where they wanted water on the train station, where they all were already in those big trains, and everybody wanted a little water because it was the middle of the summer, and they just let them see the water. They sprayed around the train, but nobody got a drop of water to drink. It was really, it's hard to tell now because you just tell something, but on whole, if you really think about it, how they were treated just like cattle. Even worse than cattle, because the cattle at least got their food, feed and everything else, which they didn't get, and they had a hard time maneuvering for the work. But then they were sent to Mauthausen, and Mauthausen was a quarry, a stone quarry. And like the kids have those things to walk up on little threads, that was the same thing, and they had to go down 4 abreast and had to pick up stones. And my husband always said, but if you took a big one, the stone killed you. If you took a small one, they shot you. So it was any which way, and then they would come up, still 4 in a row, and if the Nazis at that time had a good time before, then they would push all 4 and they all would come back down. Well, by now, Mauthausen has made steps there, and it is 99 steps from the bottom to up. And this is what they had to do 4 times a day. So then somebody that called out, is here an electrician? And so my husband figured an electrician was better than what he was doing with the stones, and so he said he was an electrician. I don't think he knew how to screw a lamp in, but that's a different story. But he was an electrician, and so they took him out from the 4 gang that had to pick up the stones. And so he did what he could. He had also a very good foreman, because in the camps they had it partitioned, different people at different places, and so he was, being an electrician, he was in front because they always wanted to call him for one thing. So one day he sent them out in the kitchen. The kitchen needed lights. Well, hunger was all the way. There was never enough that they had to eat. So he sees that the kitchen was full of smoke. And so he saw salami there, and he saw a piece of bread there. So he quickly grabbed it and put it in his jacket. And he went outside, and just as at that time, there were 2 Nazis walking outside. And they said, "What do you have there?" He said, "Nothing." So, but he kind of wiggled, and at that time when that happened, there was snow up to their knees. So whatever he had in his, the fit of the clothes was atrocious. So by wiggling a little bit, all that stuff fell right down into the snow. And so they came closer to him and they said, "What do you got there?" And he said, "Nothing." So they took him into the cabin that they had and told him, "Lay down over the chair." And then they started hitting him with a truncheon over his head, back, and lower gravities, and they told him, "You got to count to 100. And every time when he made a mistake on counting, they would say, "Start again," and the whole thing was done over again. So then they threw him out into the snow. He barely could crawl to where he was stationed and it's a good thing that he always would say that the foremen that they had, there were Italian subscriptions to the German army, and he took him in, this foreman, and he kept him in the back and put bandages on him and made it very nice for him. And he somehow he did survive, but at night they had to take 4 people to pick him up and walk with him to the main camp, because if they were counted by leaving in the morning, and if one was missing at the call at night when they came back, they would shoot 5 others. It was just like it was a game. But he said a game it wasn't. We made it, thanks goodness, he said. always when he was telling that story to us. And, you know, and in one way I can believe these people right after the war, wouldn't believe those people who were in concentration camp, that they, what they had seen, what was done to them, and how they were treated and everything else, because it is not understandable that a human being can do all these things to another human being. And like I say, he always said the family. So then when the war was over, they all were marching, and there were the POWs, the Russian POWs, and they were in front of the whole group that was marching towards a wood. That's where the Germans wanted them to go in, because they figured that they won't be bombed or anything. So but then they in front, the POWs would tell them, don't walk in, the whole wood is undermined, which would mean that certain death if they would have all marched in, because it was quite a big lot of people that were going that way. And so so they all stopped and they wouldn't walk, and then the Americans came. And they came and they gave them chocolates and everything else. They couldn't believe the skeletons that were there, living skeletons that were walking around there. Like I say, I myself was very lucky, because I was young and we were bombed out, and so my mother was trying to find a new place where to go, because we all had letters. Germany got letters we had on this day, at this time, with 2 suitcases, and they would tell you what you could pack and what you couldn't take, and they would be at that place. We had those too, but we were bombed out, so we just didn't, I should say my mother did not decide to watch what they were saying, and so we were in the basement, because the woman who had bought the house we lived in had told us we could stay. Well, then she came up and she said, listen, you have to leave again, because they saw your other kids. I had a brother and a sister, and they were seen, and so she said, you cannot stay here, because otherwise it will cost me and my husband a life. So my mother finally found a place, because it was very hard to find another place. First of all, every night were bombings, and so it was life was upside down, definitely. But we somehow we went through that, and we found something, because the lady, it was the only lady who told my mother she didn't have to show her papers, because the minute she would have seen our identifications, then the star came off anyway. As soon as we got out of the basement where we were bombed out, and the star came out right away and put in the pocket, because even so, we lived there for so long too, so people didn't know us. And with that, she wanted to see, if she would have wanted to see papers like a lot of the other places, then we couldn't have it, because we could not show our papers. Our papers had a great big J in front of it. So we stayed in that place, and then, but what are we going to do? You know, there was my brother, my sister. My brother came, and he decided the few things, underwear that he had, to throw it in a bag. And he said to my mother, I'm leaving. I'm not going where they want me to go to. So he took off, and we found out later he went down into the mountains, and he went to a farmer and said to the farmer, can I have bed and food, and I will work for you. And he looked him up and down. He most likely thought it was an AWOL, which at that time it was really towards the end of the war. And so he stayed there, but we didn't know where he got left or what he was doing, but he was gone. Then myself, I had stayed at the place we were, and and all of a sudden somebody knocked at the door, and I had all the chains on and everything. I wouldn't open, but then I had to open because we had something important to tell you. He says, I want you to come with me. And I said, my mother ever told me, you don't go with a stranger. And I slammed the door right back into his face. But this was already, the next day we had to show up at the place that they told us we were supposed to go. And so I didn't do much. I waited, and he came back, and he said, listen, and he told me who told him I should go with him, which I knew. It was the caretaker of the Jewish cemetery in Munich. He wanted me to come down to the cemetery. And he told me, he says, we will try to save your life. So then, but he says, go by yourself. So I went down there, stayed overnight, and one of his daughters took me into the country. Country was fairly safe because bombings were only in the big cities, and the little towns did not get anything of bombings. And so I stayed there, and the woman there had 2 children. There was another thing that Hitler had made, that anybody over 14 years had to work a year in a household to learn how to take care of children in a household. And so that's how I was introduced to the other inhabitants in this farm. The farm had no electricity, no running water. It was a dump, but that's where she was. And she was a big taskmaster. But I learned an awful lot at my age, how to run a household. But anyway, so then but I still didn't know. She neither. She wouldn't have told me anyway what happened to my sister. My sister was picked up right from the street and sent to Theresienstadt, better known. And that's where she, thanks goodness, survived, and she came. My brother, naturally, he survived from his farm work, not figuring that his father would be a big farmer in Minnesota that many years later. And so, like I say, we got back together, and my brother was the first one who came back, and he found a note, because we always had said, if we ever get lost one from the other, always go back to where you were last together. And so he came in, he found that slip that if you want to know where your sisters are, come down to the cemetery. You can imagine what he felt like when he saw that. But he did go, and so then he came, and he went down and he got the address, and he came out, and that was the day of Mother's Day, and that's when he came and picked us up. He knew where Mother was, because she was the one while we were still in town, and who asked her when we got the very first letter to be, how did they call it, resettled. And so she asked, can we come and stay with you, because she lived in the country too, way away from Munich. And with that, he knew where Mother most likely went to when we all were gone. She didn't know where my brother was, she didn't know where I was. But my sister was picked up in the street. She never came back at that time. So then he, so he brought me, it was Mother's Day, and he dumped me right in front of my mother because they gave him, the Americans gave him a motorbike because he was asked what would he want the best. He said, well, I would like to have some kind of a vehicle so I can go back to Munich to see what happened to the rest of my family. And so they gave him a motorbike, and also you could not, right after the war, go anywhere more than 5 kilometers over where you lived. And a paper that you could go and anywhere, and then we stop at the gas stations that the Americans had and get gas for his motorbike. And was he proud with his motorbike? But that was pretty much ours. And life after the war was no roses either. It was very bad. So, any questions?
How old were you and your sibling?
My siblings were let me think, I have to think. One was 7 years older than me, one was 8, and I was 10. So that was the age differences in us. Anybody else a question? Yes.
How did you and your husband meet?
We met after the war, because right after the war they started the dance locales and all these things, and so I saw him. And also he did find his brother again, even so they were separated. And he because what they did is they were in the street, anybody with the striped things, they asked, have you seen Jack? Have you seen this? Have you seen so? Because nobody knew. And somebody told him, yes, he was in Ebensee, which was also a very bad camp. And he was also very sick. So he made it out to Ebensee. He found somewhere about a barrel of whiskey, which he found in bottles, and he kind of filled them up. And he went to the train because he remembered when he first was in Poland, sent to work when the Germans came, that there's always, and he was sent to the railroad to keep the train tracks in order, because Räder müssen rollen für den Sieg. And he was always mistreated very much because he was a small kid at that time. And but he had that, and so we went where the train station was, because Ebensee is quite a way away from Linz, where he really was liberated, in Linz. But in Ebensee, so he got there, and he did find Jack in one of the bunks, and he was near death. If he wouldn't have come that time, he wouldn't have lived either. And so then he kind of stayed with him for a while and got him back, got him some food to, my husband was very good in organizing. He organized whatever he needed very well. So he got him back, and they both went to Munich. And you were asking where I met him. I met him after the war in Munich, because my mother started the same business that my dad had, that was taken from us in the Crystal Night, then which was bales of leather, sole leather, top leather, whatever you needed in a shoe factory. And she went to a friend and said, can you give it to me? And he said, well, yeah, he says, I can, but I know where it's going. It's going on the black market. Which she said, yeah, you're right, that's where it's going to. Otherwise, how would we make a living anymore? So she did that, and she used to do with Jack, my brother-in-law. She used to do business with him because he cut it all out the leather and put it into a suitcase and went to Poland with it. Which one day then he got caught and he was then in jail for a week. And my husband, may he rest in peace, went to Italy because somebody told him that in Italy there's ships going to Palestine. And that's where he wanted to go. So he went there, but then he found out that there it was only pregnant women and little children that they would take on the boats. So he was waiting, and then Jack told, well, I settled in Munich. He wrote him, after he got out of jail, he wrote to his brother, I'm in Munich and I'm settling here. So he went up to Munich, and that's where I met him. I met, as a matter of fact, at one of his kids' name giving. Toby. Huh? Hmm? Yeah, one of his cousins. They had that, and so this was how I met him. But I was awful young at that time. But then we met again here in America by way of 2 years in Australia for me. The indirect route, you're right, because if you were not an Australian citizen, then you had to stay 6 years until you became one. And so it was very hard. My only good thing was at that time, America finally opened up for anybody that was of Jewish faith, which they did not do right away, but at that time they did. And so my mother went to America, my sister went to America, my brother went to America, and so I naturally wanted to go to America too. So I went to the council, and I think every Friday at 4 o'clock I checked in. So he got kind of anxious what I was doing every time, because you could set your time by me. And anyway, so then the girl told him, his secretary, that I wanted to go to America. And I had the whole family there, but I couldn't go because I wasn't an Australian citizen. I would wait 6 years. And 6 years, that was a long time. So he said, you know what, he says, you write your mother to go to the embassy in Miami, that's where she was at that time. That she has a daughter underage. And 6 weeks later, I had a visa. And this is how I came to America. And then we met up again, and somehow, then he was in America too, because his brother, who also survived, and his family already had moved to America too. So then the whole family was back again together. So that's my story. And I tell you something, I wouldn't want to live again through anything like it. Which reminds me, remember when the war was with what's his name? Yeah, the crisis with Cuba. And I said to my husband, we lived in Minnesota, I said to him, if that comes, I'm going to kill the 3 kids and myself. And you know what this man who lived through such bad times said to me? No, you wouldn't kill anybody because life is too good to live.
Thank you very, very much, Arthur. It was very inspiring. Together now we will sing Atikva, the national anthem for the state of Israel. Please rise. We sing Atikva with the hope that each of us can help create a world where all people are safe within their homes and communities, and that we can live in peace. Thank you very much for coming. Thank you very much. We are going to have a break of 10 minutes. We have some refreshments in the lobby. So those who want to come back for the movie, you're more than welcome.